Staying Sharp, Social Equity Through Accessibility and Adaptive Reuse. You know, historic buildings often don't accommodate people with disabilities, and accessibility is a very important issue. And we need to reconcile how preservation goals also have an inclusive approach. And so today, for this talk, we're joined by Christine West of KITE Architects and Jeff Camusso of Shawmut Design, as they explore innovative and dramatic approaches to the Sharpe House design in their partnership with the History Department at Brown University. So with that, we'll welcome Christine and Jeff. Thank you so much.
Thanks to Venture Cafe, Toonie, Amy for inviting Christine and I to present. I'm going to do a quick introduction with a little video, spice it up a little bit. And then Christine from KITE is going to dive into the nuts and bolts. So very quickly, this is a 30-second video I'm going to let play over and over and just kind of lead you in. So we have had a great partnership with Brown University over the years, and this is the Sharpe House that you see actually moving. Sharpe House was built in 1873, so quick math tells me it's 147 years old. As a construction manager, when you sort of learn foundation, structure, envelope, MEPs, and fit out, this is not what we had in mind. So this is an extremely complex project that we work very closely with KITE Architects on. So as a company, we really strive for complex, almost kind of Rubik's Cube projects where we have to really dive in and figure out how we're actually going to get this done. So just really quickly, just a couple highlights of what you see here. Essentially, the Sharpe House was picked up, rotated 90 degrees right off its existing foundation, cribbed up, and then it traveled 180 feet to join up with the Peter greenhouse. Really cool fact is this thing moved about 6 inches per second. It took about 3 months of prep to figure out how we were going to get it done. And after some sweaty palms and interesting meetings, we got it done, and we got it set exactly where we needed to. And think there, Christine will get into all the details, but an interesting part here is this was killed 2 birds with 1 stone for Brown. So aside from giving accessibility and bringing their history program together, the space that you see right here is currently where their new performing arts center is going to go. So as a campus, Brown only has so much real estate, and if you look up on the hill now, you'll see the tower crane, and that is in the footprint of the existing Sharpe House location. So with that, I'm going to turn my screen back over to Christine, and she can run us through what makes this project really interesting.
So you should be seeing my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, this was an incredible project for us at KITE. I think everybody in our firm pitched in, and we had a great working relationship with Shawmut. Not always easy, but I think the fact that we're still friendly and want to talk about this project is a great testimony. So there's a lot to talk about here with this project. So we wanted to just really zero in on is a key aspect here, and that's the social equity piece that we face. And it's a big thing to deal with in a historic house or any kind of adaptive reuse. You know, this is that site view that hopefully should be, you know, comfortable with understanding how these 2 buildings used to be. I want to sit under this tree, which has now been turned into both lumber, but also seedlings for planting around campus. And tell you the story of what we talked about with the history department when we first sat down that very first week and said, what do you want out of this project? This house is being moved. We have the potential to join it up with the Peter greenhouse on the left, which is their headquarters for the history department. I said, what are your top 3 goals for this project? And they said, accessibility, accessibility, and accessibility. I said, okay, but seriously, if anything gets in the way of that, its accessibility rules. And it's like, okay, you feel pretty strongly. Most people are generally aware of this and feel it's important, but why? So basically in the months before this project arose, there was a PhD candidate who was essentially accepted into this program. She got to campus and the building on the right confronted her. The graduate students are on the 4th floor of that existing building. There is no way into this building. There is no way for her to interact with her colleagues, to use that office space, to really be a part of the history department. She had to turn down this incredible research opportunity and potentially all the connections and academic research there because this was inaccessible. And that was a big deal. It was a big deal to the history department. It was a big deal to the university at the highest levels. So we took that to heart, and I think everybody on the team took that to heart and went to extraordinary lengths to make it happen. And the innovation comes in is that we really did look at this almost as a found object. And I know we have people from Sovereign Preservation Society on board. You know, we do work a lot with historic structures, and we figured we needed to respect that character and do what we could to save what we could, but also be rather imaginative. And I really appreciated seeing all those Superman ideas, because at the heart of it, some of the things that we did involve that strategy where maybe we hollow out the core, maybe we go vertical, and maybe we think about interiors differently than we think about exteriors. So again, that's the relationship SketchUp. This is the path it took. One of the first challenges is where do we put it? Because once you move it, that's fine, but how do you put it down? And that's actually a bit more difficult than it might seem. The university, I think, may have been imagining at the very outset that we were just going to put it on a new foundation, maybe give it a coat of paint and walk away. But this accessibility question begged the question, well, how close can these buildings be? What is the space between them? How do you get into it? And so this is the hole, basically, it was moved into. What we did throughout the move, we did the foundation first and figured out a basic game plan. And I just wanted to show you a couple of these up close photos because you're probably curious exactly how a house moves. Basically, you take away the old foundation and basement, you slip these steel beams, needle beams underneath it, you reinforce the structure, you take out anything that's going to get damaged if you can, like fireplace mantles, or you leave them in and just make sure they're stabilized. You can see here, there's window units that are still in there. So it doesn't mean you have to empty it out completely. We took off a side porch that we knew we were not going to be adding back. And then the, sorry, I think on the right, you can see actually the piers. It's essentially jacked up with, much like you might jack up a car, with those heavy timber pylons, and then put on a moving truck with wheels and slid into place. So this is where it landed, you know, and we had a lot of conversations about exactly how forward and back. And one of the things that drove it was after we came up with a concept of a bridge and an interior connection that really mandated that where these two synced up was like almost spaceships docking. That's a view of the basement. It's pretty cool light under there. So we essentially built the basement kind of around the house underneath it and then let the house down onto the basement. Yeah, that's some of the shoring and those needle beams. This is a particular design consideration. You have to figure out what happens to those holes once the beams are removed, and also how you get the beams out. So we couldn't be too close to the neighboring structures. Okay, so this is what the interior, this is a very close-up view. It's not a trick photograph. This was built as a duplex, two halves exactly the same. It was the second generation of the famous family, manufacturing family here. And so it was just twins. So this was great if you're not joining the houses. You have a big central stair and hallways on each side. But as a unified building is incredibly inefficient. And there actually ended up with a lot of dead ends and ways that you couldn't actually get from one side to the other. And that's a little more normal view, so you can see how that works. So to get up to the second floor on the other side required actually going back all the way up and then back down. It's a little ridiculous. So what we thought of, I think the big idea that our team at KITE kind of came up with is that when these buildings are joined, we knew we needed a second stairwell. We said, well, instead of adding a new elevator and stair to the outside, which would be very difficult to blend in historically, it was actually very difficult to get it to work with the interior circulation. How about we take out that central inefficient double stair and put in a new code compliant stair, put in a new code compliant elevator, and use that as the second exit for Peter Green. Now to do that, we had to connect all the levels, and thankfully, our upper two floors actually aligned almost perfectly within about 3 inches because they were built with similar construction methods. And we were free then to set the foundation level wherever it needed to be to match up with the lowest level of Peter Green. So that key move really just unlocked the whole rest of the design. From there, you can see we actually found ways to use these connections to, and we'll show you the massing in a bit. But this is that gutting. So all you students who are still on the line who want to see what it looks like when you tear out floors. This is a wood structure. The team at Shawmut really put a lot of thought, energy. This is not about cost. This is not about schedule. This is about some good old-fashioned problem solving. And how do you hold that roof up when you take the wall supporting it away before the steel comes in? You can see them building the elevator shaft, which is actually structural masonry as it goes. So a lot of clever thinking here. And you can see how interesting that space becomes. You can kind of start to see some of the plaster detail up on top. We'll have some more views of this as it gets built out. Okay, so this is basically the scheme that explains how we connect it. So you'll see on that bridge, that's connecting the second and third floors of Peter Green. The loggia level or garden level connects the ground floor. And that addition was really an opportunity. The university said, well, we're investing X amount of dollars for just a few pennies more. We can actually add a classroom. We can add new graduate studios, so they don't have to be on the top floor. We can add more faculty offices because there were substandard faculty offices there. And more importantly, we can connect this so that those two separate buildings can be a unified whole and they have one headquarters. And culturally, for an academic unit, any of you who are teaching or studying, you kind of understand that sense of community that develops within a department. So the other thing that's important to note here is that Peter Green had been outfitted with a small lift that connected that lowest level with their first main floor. So they had some partial accessibility, but it was only in that building, and it really did not connect any of the other offices. And you can see that graduate studios in the upper right corner. That was not deemed code compliant, or particularly safe, so we were actually able to reuse that as a mechanical space. Okay, so here's a drone shot of that bonus room. So you can see that's the old back door, the foundations of the new graduate studios and loggia. This is that new stair. So one of the themes that you'll see here is that we basically were able to salvage a lot of elements if they weren't rooms that were wholly kept. So this new stair, we did a modern interpretation of. We had a new custom metalwork, but we asked Shawmut to take one of those railings and the balustrades, put it in a safe place, pick the rest railing they could, and we worked it into the design. And as this open stair, as a reminder of what used to be there, again, it's not historic preservation per se, it is adaptive reuse, but this has become a very airy, central kind of spot that is really starting to become a hub for the department. So there's the view back at the new classroom and the elevator on the left during construction, of course. That's Phil Derby, who was our key person on site throughout this and had to deal with a lot of the headaches. I want to give him and Albert Garcia, my partner, a big shout out because they worked incredibly hard on this to make this success. So you can see the university took the opportunity, we took the opportunity to bring back a lot of the historic character. This building had been kind of the victim of a ton of exposed sprinkler piping and mechanical units and drop ceilings and trim that had been covered over. So we were able to uncover quite a bit. So there is an element to some interior preservation on this, and that mostly was within the offices that existed. So here's Phil and our intern from last summer, Melina, going out to measure. This is going to become the new classroom space, and you'll see this emerge. The other thing is that we really wanted this to feel like a garden edition, like a porch, and you could really read that history and see those layers. And that kind of brings me to this kind of final theme. It's not often in architecture where you get a project whose use underscores some of the architectural meaning that you bring to it. So by incorporating or preserving some of these elements, like this is a salvage door on the right that's now the world's most beautiful electrical closet. These mantles were a theme throughout the buildings that we were able to save, preserve, reinstall. The design of the exterior really is meant to embody the role that the history department does in interpreting text, but also interpreting current events and making history now. The things that we see in the news are tomorrow's history. And so we started by looking at what the surrounding architecture was like, both contemporary and historic, and seeing, okay, there are porches, there are vertical windows, there's cornice lines, and then there's fine-grained textures and siding, trim, exposed concrete. This is what the addition and the detailing eventually became. And you can see how it kind of welcomes people from the south with that new entry. It's very much a main entry. It's not a back door, a secondary door. And once the Performing Arts Center on the right is finished, we're very much looking forward this to being a courtyard space. And I think in addition to that student who couldn't attend, it's important to recognize that the history department does want to have community outreach and community engagement. So this was yet another found opportunity. It says, hey, now that we have this great combined facility, let's have an outdoor space and let's have receptions. And now with the COVID protocols, hey, it's really great that they've got an outdoor space where they can have community events. So we'll show you a couple of real life slides of this, and it came out pretty darn close to this. So here we see this is going to be the focus area on this whole set. You can see how there's 3 elements now. So Peter Green on the left, the bridge and loggia in the middle and the lower right. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the south side of Sharpe. Okay, and so when I talk about reinterpretation, what we mean is that we take cues in terms of scale and massing. So alignment of windows, proportion of windows, and then little things like that bay that's projecting. Well, instead of an outward projecting bay, we developed a spandrel detail that subtly went out and then in like a ribbon, but recalled some of those angles so that as your eye looks at it, you kind of sync up with those little angular moments. And then the detailing of this very much reflects our modern energy codes. You know, we have to have, as a commercial building, exterior insulation. And so the way you build a wood frame building and clapboard is very different than you would have built it even 20 years ago. And so the detailing around these windows and that trim reflects a very different way of how that window sits within the wall. All right, and that's the assemblage together. You can see how those bays and those regulating lines really come across. And then that carries through all the way to the details. You know, we're very intentional about that foundation. We had to design in a hurry because they were moving a building, but you can see how that angle then works through. And then we were able to use that theme on a lot of the interior details as well. So that's the building under construction on the left. And you can see that the view of the houses across the way, where our structural engineer, David O'Day, masterful structural engineer, he actually rented one of those, the littler one in that building when he was a graduate student studying structural engineering at Brown way back. So this is a very special moment for him to be able to celebrate this view. Okay, and that's the rendering. So yeah, that's how it actually was starting to shape up. And this is one of the few views I have of the back, because now the Performing Arts Center is starting to kind of get really close. So we'll have more photos after that's done. But you can see here how that garden loggia is going to be very visible. We're at about ground level for the new Performing Arts Center. We were very much aware that this was going to be a main view from that place. You know, and again, here you can very clearly see that it's 2 older structures and then their newest cousin arriving on the scene to unite them all. And then to the front, again, it's always a challenge making the front entries. We prefer to say this is the Brown Street side and that's the campus side. But we were able to work in a pathway that worked naturally with the grades to make the existing doors basically accessible. It's not fully accessible just yet. We need to add an ADO, which is an automatic door opener. But we, again, very much did not want people to feel like they were going to a back door or a side door. So that, and the university has really taken this to heart. Last summer, we worked on about 9 different buildings to try to bring more accessibility features into it. And I want to give them a lot of credit for going to such lengths to make that happen. This is a photograph of the addition as you're approaching that. And this was Warren Jagger as the photographer. He's very talented. And this is that view now. This is the graduate lounge. So it's just inside that door. We use things like the trellis to shield from the sun, but we very much wanted to have a connection to the outside. this is the basement. And the real goal was to not make it feel like a basement. This connects now back to Peter Green and a new faculty lounge. You know, again, these spaces where you can informally connect, where you can take a moment away from your desk and meditate, are all pretty important. So this is the bridge. One of the surprise moments I think that came out of this for a lot of people, we saw it coming and they took advantage of it, was when we connected this bridge, we knew we were going to intersect with this very interesting Second Empire roof line. And one option would have been to kind of get rid of all this interior detail and put up some gypsum board and make it a very conventional interior. We were like, you know, how many people actually get the chance to get up to this detail and up close and personal and touch it and feel it and actually interact with it safely because, you know, lead paint's always an issue. We said, how about if we take this and make this a moment? Because beyond that building, if you actually look to the left, you can see the entire campus. You can actually see all the way to the bay. It's a stunning view. And so he said, well, let's make a place where people can talk on their cell phones, maybe just get out of their office. And it's called The Perch. And the Peter Green family generously gave another donation to actually make this happen with the custom millwork and integration of their shingles with the slate, and to make this just one of those special moments project. All right, and that's the new entry thing. So we see the elevator on the right, we see the doors back there, the new stairwell. It's very light and airy, you can see both sides. All right, and this is the new classroom. You kind of want to see that lecture that's being given. And so again, seeing those remnants of the past and being reminded that this was part of an older structure is very much a part of that feeling. We actually got questions from the senior administration who walked through and saw that the paint was maybe a little crooked and maybe the clapboards were old, and they asked, well, why didn't we just clean this up? Why don't we do new clapboards? It's like, you're not getting the point. This no longer needs to protect from weather. It's now an artifact. It is not an enclosure. So we've transformed from the outside. It is, and it does need to be repainted and maintained, but on the inside now this is almost like a museum for that building. And this is one of the faculty offices. They're all like this. This is a nice one, but they're all this nice. We picked a color scheme that would kind of unify things, and we very intentionally set a lighting scheme in the hallways that would emphasize contrast and have a more residential feeling to it. And again, those mantles are just gorgeous. I also want to give credit to Liddy Slater, interior design, who helped with a lot of the interior selections and especially the furnishings. That those polka dot chairs are a big hit. Right, and that's the view from the outside. And then this is one of our favorite shots, and I think this may be my last one of the series, but you know, as these came together, you know, it reminded Albert of like two battleships in a harbor kind of going prow to prow. And so this view is taken from the new bridge, and you can kind of tell with that contemporary storefront. So it's one of my favorite moments in the whole project. Okay, so I kind of raced through that because I knew we only had 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, you crushed that. Nice job.
But I think I said everything I needed to say. I gave a similar presentation to a group that was supposed to be a 20-minute, and we ended up talking for like an hour and a half. It's like, okay, we gotta stop now. So if anybody has any questions on any aspect at all of what it took to put this together, happy to do that. And Jeff, if you wanted to add anything else as we gloss through here.
No, I mean, you had mentioned O'Day. We had a great team on this project working with you. You know, I mentioned like everything you see here with the cribbing, and it's crazy to think that you lift the bill, you know, all the structural work that had to go into a 150-year-old building to get it to be able to move, and sort of being able to work together to figure this stuff out on the fly. And then once, you know, it was a big day at Shawmut, everybody was watching the video as it moved, and then to kind of leave it there suspended while you build the foundation under it. It's just, you know, thinking outside the box, and it's so much more rewarding to build a project like this, you know, with all the designers, because you need everybody here. This isn't something where you draw it up and throw it over the fence and go build it. So the amount of collaboration and sort of innovation and really kind of thinking through and trying to forecast maybe some of the hiccups was our team was consumed with the project, and it makes it hard to come off a project like this and go, build a new, 7-story building with office space. It's like, you have to do it to pay the bills. But looking at these photos, it gets me really excited. I'm also glad I was not the project manager on this project. I do not think I would have slept very much, especially that photo there.
Yeah.
For all the RISD students who are still on the call, when you do take floors out of an existing building, it is quite the process to kind of watch through how that actually works. So I think it's really, we always tell our people all the time, think like a designer. And the more the designer can kind of think through how this is actually going to work, it just leads to really great projects. And this is kind of the prize project for us. It's not the biggest, most extravagant project, but it's definitely one of the most unique and sort of rewarding projects. When a project gets done like this, it feels great, And so when someone drives by and sees the new Performing Arts Center, it's very easy to say, wow, look at that. But I think at least everybody in our office will keep going a little bit more and be like, I can't believe we did that, So it's very rewarding, and it takes all hands on deck to finish a job like this and have it come out as well as it did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you all, were there issues with the building after it was moved? I think about these old buildings settling already, they're already cracking before you moved it.
Yeah, that's a great question. There were lessons learned from the move of the Peter Green house. We were not involved with that. That was LLB's project. But so the university had some of the same people, so they knew kind of what the issues were. Now that had a lot more ornate trim and a lot more ornate detail. But one of the issues can be plaster cracking. So one of the things that happened right after the move is, well, we'd done a survey of all the walls beforehand. We set up a bid allowance so that our costs were kind of covered in the budget that the university set aside. And we did a post-move review of all the cracks, any structural issues. There was one location where somewhere in history, somebody had moved a closet, not understanding it had some structural roll, and the ceilings was starting to collapse a little bit, but we spotted it, we fixed it. But yeah, things do shake around, and it's kind of like an earthquake. This is a little gentler than that, but there's enough redundancy in these buildings, thank goodness, that it's pretty resilient. So it could have been a lot worse. Sure.
Christine, this is Seth. I was actually one of the project managers for moving Peter Green when I was at Brown.
No kidding. Oh, so you could have told us some things.
Well, I was more cleanup crew. When Peter Green looked great when they moved it, all the plaster was still in place, and it arrived great. It was in good condition, but nobody knew there was 2 layers of sheetrock with very little purchase up to lath on that. What was connecting that, and the move and the introduction of new HVAC into the building loosened a lot of things up. And the ceilings on the top floor all came in. And like, I remember going into a professor's office who was, glasses at the end of his nose, reading a history book. I'm like, you are in danger, pal. Like, you gotta go. So they condemned that. It was, the ceiling was literally sitting on a sprinkler pipe. So it was, and that happened throughout the 3rd floor. So there was a very quick emergency plan in place. It's something you just can't foresee for that, but it is a good example as to why you would do some initial investigation prior to that to see what your conditions are, even if they look very pretty.
Yeah, right. I will say that, so this is a design build project too. Again, KITE worked for Shawmut on this one, and that made us pay attention, because when the contractor wants something from you, it reverses the power dynamic of a traditional bid build and something a lot more cooperative, frankly. And I think it challenged the contractors too, to not just dump something in the architect's or engineer's lap. It's like, we do have to work together, because we can't go back to our mutual client, the university, and say we can't do it. It's like, no, they're paying us to figure it out. So yeah, that's great. One of the things I do like about, and I was skeptical at first, I will say, I came to the design build relationship thinking that, this is like, we're not going to be able to get our design ideas through. We're not going to be able to get the integrity. But I got to say, Shawmut really respected that and understood it and valued our role and advice. The risk dog idea approach that Brown uses, and Seth, I'm sure you're very familiar with this, but they basically started the project by saying, well, what can go wrong here? And we had a list. It was a pretty long list of all the things that could go wrong. But and they set aside money for that to cover it. And we said, you know what, when we connect that bridge to Peter Green, that's going to be a big problem. We're going to find stuff. We don't know what it is yet. There's going to be something. We don't know. And we got almost up to the end. They had set aside a pretty big sum of money to cover any risks. And we were almost connected. And the team was like, well, can we take that money for something else now? Like, can we do it? It was like, nope, we're not connected. And sure enough, we found that roof over Peter Green was basically full of water. There's 3 layers deep and it was saturated and it was about to come down. So we were able to use the money to pull it off, and it wasn't an upset to the budget because we knew something was going to go wrong. So it's a kind of a good approach.
Yeah, Brown is a master of really aligning contingency with actual risk items. So it's not just an arbitrary percentage, but really studying it ahead of time. This is a good learning lesson.
Yeah, there was a question about the technology for the move. And what was really interesting, when we were preparing this presentation a couple of months ago with the superintendent, he kind of laughed because he said it was a combination of what he said is new school and old school. So there was a GPS monitoring screen that was mounted to the house to track the exact location. So it was dialed in, and once it got set, you know, everybody ran out with measuring tapes and plumb bobs and so it was really cool to use the technology to get there and just kind of confirm it with yourself with technology that's been around since they built the Superman building, you know. So it's kind of that combination of the two I thought was pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the David O'Day's office, they do drone modeling. They basically have a point cloud that in one image came from them, where they actually can reconstruct, complete with all the leaves and all the trees surrounding it. So they had a pretty good idea, and they shared that with us, and we reinterpreted it for architectural things. When we built that bridge, after the steel was set, Albert was talking to the carpenter. The bridge like lined up within half an inch of where it was supposed to be. It's just like, oh. But yeah.
Trust but verify.
Yeah. And so Guy Davis Building Movers, you know, these are experts. Their business is moving buildings. You know, they're working not just on campuses, but historic structures, you know, I think all over the country, certainly the Eastern Seaboard. You know, so they brought a lot of expertise to the table. And yeah, it's one of the bigger ones.
It's a sustainable practice too, right, Christine? I mean, just looking at that, you know, we work with a lot of campuses in New England, and they all struggle with they need space, right? And rather than, you know, demoing a building like this to create it, like how can you get creative? And this is just a great story to kind of tell that it can be done, you know. And yeah, I think that you'll see, I think this will be more common practice for these other institutions going forward.
And it's an opportunity to also shore up the building itself when it otherwise probably nothing structurally would have been done to it.
Right.
Yeah. Honestly, my understanding was that, you know, the Sharpe House was kind of just on a very secondary list for just keep it going, but not a lot of major reinvestment. So it really turned into quite a gift to be able to have this refurbished like this. It's still my favorite shot.
You said that the lead time for this project felt rushed. You didn't have much.
No.
Does that?
If somebody had, yeah, well, and maybe Jeff has his own opinion on scheduling thing. I'll remember it well because it was early April. They called us in to kickstart the project and said, okay, well, normally I would advise them, well, we probably need 10 to 14 months to kind of really work through the design and the details. So we started in April. They said, well, the building's moving in September, so get cracking. So, because, you know, the PAC schedule was a much bigger deal, and a daily delay on a project of the scale of the Performing Arts Center it starts to swamp the budget of Sharpe House. So if they needed us to rush a little bit, to put some extra people on it, we did what we needed to do. So we got the foundation package out as an early package. We had to work through the overall design and have a general direction. Meanwhile, what we were doing is that Brown does have a very good set of design reviews to make sure there's accountability at all levels, from the project manager and department level all the way up to the corporation and their design review subcommittee. Craig Barton was the head of that, and now he's the university architect. And they did a fantastic job of prepping us and letting us know what we needed to communicate, what we needed to focus on in almost a just-in-time manner. So we would be working up the massing, like, okay, a week before it needed to be presented to DRC. Okay, that's approved. Now we can work on the detail, and we can get that done like a week before. So the approvals process was almost as much of a constraint as the construction, and everybody worked really hard to make sure it actually got improved internally, which was a challenge. So we had the foundation plan. Once we issued that, we issued the part one, which was the shell and exterior, basically core and shell. And then we basically moved into the interiors and finishing out. So it was really broken into multiple packages in a very fluid kind of way. So yeah, fast. So it took about, it did take, I think we finished the drawings in November, started really serious construction around that time. And then we finished up a year later with everybody moving in right after the Thanksgiving holidays last year.
Well, this is really fantastic to hear. Any new projects of a similar nature that are being tackled these days?
It's great that you ask that. What we've seen around institutions and universities around the country is that there's been a big pause. Understandably, revenue has suffered as students leave the dorms and want to have refunds. There's a lot of questions about what enrollment for the fall is going to be like. And so most institutions have put kind of a halt on all spending. Their planning staff is still kind of working on things. And I think we're just starting to see some priorities reemerge and some stabilization. And I think we'll know a lot more this fall about what that is. So right now, one of the projects that we're working on is actually at Roger Williams University down in Bristol. And we had been all set with them to refurbish their studios. Our firm had designed the original competition winning entry back in 1984. I actually moved to Providence to work with Albert and the rest of the team at KITE on the graduate studio additions. So now, 16 years later, to be at a refresh of their architecture studios and how they work in that, it was really a great honor. So we kick-started that in February of 2020. So that unfortunately got a little sidetracked, but we have been helping them essentially re-outfit their architecture studios, a portion of them, because they actually have increased enrollment for the fall, because a lot of their study abroad programs obviously are not going to Italy or anywhere else for that matter. So they actually need more desks right now. So we've pivoted as the universities are pivoted, and we're building up our research and our knowledge of best practices and design practices to help both institutions and offices kind of figure out what's next for the physical places we inhabit. Having said that, I think now we're also experts in house moving. So we have heard about a couple projects for institutions that I won't name, but I think the more you learn, the more people kind of appreciate and say, okay, now you've done it. It's not just talk. You really did the deep dive and the hard work to make it happen. So
you actually you bring up a point here, with everything that's going on in the world, whether it's obviously, I think everyone thought this would be done by now, and it seems like we're in it for the long haul. Are you all talking about internally how this is impacting design, buildings, reuse in the future, how you look at those spaces? Or is it, do you really still see it as a temporary blip?
It's divided, and a lot of this is coming from clients. I think on the private construction side, what we're seeing is there's some opportunistic investment, with the uncertainty. There's properties for sale, and there's maybe things to do that are with building that might be even safer than the stock market, even though that's high right now. There's some uncertainty on financial markets. But from a design side, we're seeing a much bigger value on outdoor space. It's like all of a sudden where outdoor space was a luxury, it's like now it's like, oh my goodness, yes, we need big sidewalk cafes. It's this notion that even if this becomes over, what happens with the next virus? And I think that's helpful. even in New England, that's a little bit of a challenge, but will be something that's good. Mechanical systems. There's a lot of, just as everybody became expert epidemiologists, people are starting to become expert mechanical engineers and know all about filtering and refresh rates and circulation patterns. So I think design of mechanical systems and how it interacts with the architecture is going to be a really big deal. Not only how it literally keeps people safe and keeps virus particles from circulating, but also how do you know it's safe? When you walk in, what are the cues? So we're doing some research into things like smells or drafts or just visibility of air supply and air movement to cue people that know that measures have been taken. You can see plexiglass, but you can't necessarily see if the return is over there or non-existent.
Yeah, I think similar to that until we figure out exactly what the rules are, I think a lot of clients are hesitant to do anything, because the only thing that hasn't changed in the last 4 months is the fact that everything changes. So with revenues down, whether you're private, public, there's so much uncertainty that they're not sure. We've been on countless calls, some of them Christine and I, about what to do, and they take it all in. I think what's actually happening is that they sort of hope that we kind of survive the storm this fall, see how the semester goes, and hopefully we can, everyone says get back to normal. It won't be the same, but the overall program's not going to change. You can still have multiple people in a dorm. There's been a lot of conversations about, what is better, to have one one restroom on a floor with multiple students using it, or individual bathrooms, where it would sound like it makes sense to have individual bathrooms so you're not sharing with everybody. But if you have shared restrooms, then they can be cleaned 2 or 3 times a day. If you have individuals, you're really leaving it up to the students. So there's been so much talk and so much analysis, and I think everybody has all the information, and it's kind of just a wait and see how this thing ends up. And if it's going to be a wholesale change, it's just going to cost a lot of money to go back and retrofit. So I think what you'll see is future design where you're using a lot more, tile, hard surfaces versus fabrics and carpets, and really being cognizant of that. But I just don't think economically it's going to make sense to, go through these dorms, go through these school buildings, and make the wild modifications that really keeps everybody separate. I think it's going to have to be more sort of training and traffic, pedestrian flow than actual redesign of existing spaces, is my guess.
Interesting. Well, I think that's a great place to kind of just leave it for now. Thank you so much, Christine and Jeff.
Yeah,
this is
thanks
a
for allowing
great
us to be here.
project.